Hi there, and thank you for watching today's session on writing a standout resume. My name is Shannon Amaral. I'm the Career Services Program Specialist here at Fanshawe College in the Employment and Student Entrepreneurial Services Department. We're located in D Building D1063. So in today's session, we'll talk a little bit about what a resume is used for, and then we're going to touch on the different types of resumes. So what is your resume used for? Many people think the purpose of a resume is to get them a job. This is not entirely correct. Your resume provides a summary of your experiences, your abilities, your skills, as well as your accomplishments. So whether you have a paper version or electronic version, your resume is a tool for you to sell yourself to those prospective employers. Your resume is basically a self-advertisement that sums up all your experience on one page. Your resume is one of the most important pieces to that job application. It gives that hiring manager an overview of the qualifications you have for the job for which you're applying for. If your resume is done correctly, you should be getting those interviews. If you're having trouble being considered for one, then it might be something in the way that's wrong with your resume. However, if you're having those interviews, but you're not getting the job, then there might be a problem that lies in the way that you're conducting yourself in those types of situations. So another thing with your resume you want to remember is your resume basically allows you to convey your intent in applying to that job to those prospective employers. So regardless of the amount of hours you put into your resume, that prospective employer may only glance at it for a few seconds before they decide whether or not to grant you an interview. So another purpose of your resume is for you to be able to introduce yourself to those prospective employers and for you to be able to communicate your most important assets to them. So the first style of resume is called a chronological style resume. I'll show you what it looks like just on the next screen. With a chronological resume, it lists your work experiences and your achievements, always starting from the current or most recent held position, followed by your previous positions below. For that exact reason, the chronological resume is a perfect choice for job seekers and students who have plenty of experience and achievements to list on your resume. So here's an example of a chronological style resume. You can see here with a chronological format, it offers a historical timeline of your work experience, descriptions of what you did and how well you did it, all grouped together under the employer information. Typically with a chronological formatted resume, it starts off with a highlight section. And this is where you really want to make sure you include your most relevant skills, your personal strengths, your qualifications that are relating to that job. You also want to make sure that you include your most marketable features here that's really appealing to that particular employer's needs. So that means really looking at that job posting and highlighting all the skills the employers are looking for and making that front and center in your resume and cover letter writings. Following the highlight section is typically your experience section. And again, you always want to list your experience with your most recent employer listed first, and then the least recent employers are listed last. Other sections like education and volunteer experience generally follow the section after, but typically for, if you do have a cooperative education component, if you have some form of placement, we typically recommend that you place your education ahead of your experience. Because at this point in your career, that is typically the most interesting thing to employers. By far, I can tell you that the style of format you're looking at right now, the chronological resume, is by far the most preferred style by employers. This particular style allows employers to better evaluate what you have to offer. It's logic, it's straightforward, it answers all the questions. What have you done and where have you done it? The other style of resume is called a functional resume. And with the functional resume, it focuses on your skills and your experience rather than that chronological history that we just spoke about. So I'll show you what it looks like just on the next screen. And so here you can see with your chronological style resume comparison to your functional resume, it looks very different. It's very different from the traditional one that you just seen. What happens with a functional style resume is the result is the focus then is shifted from your job titles and the amount of time that has passed to the actual skill that you possess. So you can see at the very top, you still have your contact information. Beneath that, you have your summary section. And then you have your career experience. In this case, you can see we've listed administration, training development, customer service. And then beneath that, you have your career history, followed by your education. So looking at this functional resume, oftentimes students will say, how do I know if a functional resume is right for you? As students and as job seekers, you have tons of options and choices when it comes to creating your resume. But since a functional resume focuses on skills over dates, it's going to be typically more ideal for somebody who maybe has gaps in between their employment history, maybe somebody who's fairly early in their career, maybe you only have internship-based experience, maybe you're making a significant career switch, just to name a few. Oftentimes with a functional resume, I can tell you that it's less commonly used than the chronological resume that you've seen first. So if you don't have a reason to use this style of resume, we would really encourage you to use the one you've seen first, which was the chronological style resume. There's also what we like to call a third option. And the other option is called a combination resume, which basically offers the best of both worlds. On a combination resume, your skills are highlighted first and then followed by your work experience. So that is another option. But of the three, the first one that you've seen is the most common resume style used for online job boards and preferences in terms of employers. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the different sections within your resume. So the sections of your chronological resume start off with your contact information, your highlights of qualification or summary of skills. You have an education section, experience section, and then you have other interests or activities. So with the first section, of your resume, you have your contact information. With your contact information, you're going to list your full name, followed by your professional email address. It might be something that includes your name, but no employer wants to see something like bigdaddy@hotmail.com. So do ensure it is a professional email address. Your phone number. So make sure with your phone number that you have voicemail set up so that employers can leave you a message. Your address is optional. Typically, your home address would go on your resume in your contact section, but it's really no longer required by most employers because it can lead to discrimination and privacy concerns. So with that being said, employers are still interested in knowing your general location. So one reason obviously might be to filter through prospects by distance to access what your commute time or traffic obstacles might be. So at least maybe, if you don't want to include your whole address, then at least include your postal code or your city and province, at least to give the employers a general idea as to where you are located. You can also see here that we have listed links to websites or LinkedIn accounts. If you have any blogs, websites, you want to include this here. You can also include your LinkedIn URL, but just make sure you've customized your LinkedIn address as well. And lastly, more for our international students, no personal details. So what that means is you don't want to be adding personal details like your immigration status, a photo of yourself, your height, your social insurance number. That personal details needs to be removed off your resume and cover letter. For your highlights of qualification, or oftentimes you may see it labeled as summary of skills, it is 100% a required field on your resume. You really want to make sure that you insert your own industry examples here. You want to look at the skills of what the employers are looking for that you should have on your resume. So earlier I mentioned looking at that job description and highlighting all the skills the employers are looking for and making that front and center into your resume. You also want to look at the transferable skills, which are really important to highlight when maybe you have some limited experience in a particular job area you're applying for. When we talk about transferable skills, you just want to remember that skills can be developed in many areas of life, and that includes working, part-time, full-time. That includes within education, in the classroom, volunteer opportunities. Maybe you have some certain hobbies you're interested in. Maybe you're part of an extracurricular activity outside of school. You're part of a sports team. Look at all of those important key skills that you can include from those situations. We will touch on a little bit more of transferable skills as we progress through the workshop. You also want to make sure in this section here, you're summarizing your top 5 to 10 skills and abilities and qualifications you've acquired through education, experience that you have that are always relatable to the job that you are applying to. You always want to make sure that you describe every single skill to let the employer know how you're able to use that skill. And we're going to touch on that a little bit more as we progress through the workshop. So touching on skills and accomplishments. So with your resume, it should always be tailored. It has to be able to show that you indeed are a good fit for the job. It has to be able to demonstrate that you have done some research about that particular organization that you're applying to. You always want to make sure that you show and match the skills that you have with the employer's needs. So you want to make sure your resume always details your abilities, not just summarizing your previous job duties. And what we mean by that is, for example, a lot of us, you want to be able on your resume to tell the person reading your resume something he or she doesn't already know about you. So for the most part, hiring managers understand what duties are obviously associated with certain job titles. So it's common knowledge that, let's say, for example, somebody who's an executive assistant or an administrative assistant, we know with those roles, you answer phones, you manage files, you provide customer service. So putting down those statements as bullets on your resume is just using up valuable space. On the other hand, you really want to make sure that you include accomplishments that paint a picture of your abilities, one that's going to be able to sell itself. So talking about articulating your skills, there's just a few here that we want to talk about. Customer service, organization and time management, collaboration, professional communication, attention to detail and accuracy. So these are many skills that we see listed on skills on resumes. So you don't want to just list customer service, collaboration. You have to be able to tell the employer how it is that you were able to use that skill. So we'll use customer service as an example. So how are you going to write this on your resume? First, you want to identify the skill, customer service, then the definition, providing professional and positive experiences to people, ensuring required needs are met. Then you have to ask yourselves, what did you do? Going above and beyond to provide excellent service by asking questions and providing support. And lastly, we have to say, why is it so important? Customer satisfaction, and it promotes and represents a positive image for the company. If you then go ahead and categorize those for the skill, the definition, what you did and why it's so important, when you put these pieces together, yours could look something similar to this. Committed to providing professional and valuable service to customers to ensure a positive image for ABC company. So here you want to be able to not just list customer service, you really want to be able to let the employer how it is that you were able to demonstrate that particular skill. So really make sure you're writing a full writing skills statement. With education listed on your resume, it is a required field. You're going to list the section called education. Beneath that in bold, you're going to list the credential. So name of the certificate, diploma, or degree that you have. Beneath that, you're going to list the institution's name, followed by their location. And then over to the right, you're going to identify the date, the month, year, and end date, or if you are still registered, you're going to list it as present. With your education section of your resume, you want to show the employer all your academic achievements. So that includes all post-secondary education, whether in Canada or abroad, maybe descriptions of each program. You can also include projects, training certificates, awards, grades, and licenses. Maybe you have an amazing grade point average. Maybe you got on the Dean's Honor Roll or Principal's Honor Roll. You can include this information in this section here as well. You want to list all the colleges that you attended, the degrees that you've obtained, any special awards and honors, as we mentioned. You can even include professional development courses and certificates in your education section. The number one thing I will tell you is students often ask, if I completed high school, should I list high school as a education? Typically, high school does not need to go on your education. Post-secondary is obviously considered a higher level of education. The only time you would want to include your high school credentials is if the job posting is asking you for a high school diploma. For your experience section, it's going to be similar in terms of layout as you did for the education. You're going to list experience. In bold, you're going to list the position title. Beneath that, you're going to name the organization's name, their location, followed by the month, year, end date, or present. With your experience section, you want to consider all the experience you have, whether it was a paid experience or not, whether it was Canadian or international. Experience is experience. You just want to remember that within each entry that you list, each entry needs to always be in reverse chronological order, which means, the most recent goes first, followed by less previous afterwards. So always list most recent first, working backwards. A rule of thumb is you don't want to list back more than 10, 15 years. So think of 15 years as the cutoff in terms of listing previous employment. So 10, 15 years. If you are somebody who maybe has a gap in your experience, it will stand out, but by simply putting a line explaining why you have that gap is all the recruiters need to know. You can recommend maybe doing, I would always recommend that somebody puts a one-liner. So you could put something like took some personal time off for personal development. Maybe you're a caretaker. You just don't want to be leaving gaps of time on your resume if you don't need to. And if that is your case, you're going to want to include some irrelevant experience to fill in that space. Even if you're somebody who doesn't actually have experience, you should always still have an experience section on your resume. And in this section here, you're maybe going to describe your school program, maybe an internship, maybe some volunteer work that you've done, but you still have to make sure you have an experience section. And the last thing I want to mention is, as we talked about earlier, you don't need to list every single duty associated with that particular job. You want to make sure that you only put the information of what the employers can be interested in knowing. So just be mindful of that, because your resume is only a max of 2 pages, 1 to 2 pages. So you have to be careful as to how many bullet points you're using per employer. When we talk about adding context and content with your resume, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but we need to make sure that every single skill listed on your resume tells the reader where or how you use that particular skill. We did that exercise with customer service. You can see on today's screen, you can see handled cash. Instead of just using 2 words and saying handled cash, maybe you're going to say something like process cash transactions while delivering exceptional customer service. Again, don't just state the actual job duty, explain the full task using a complete statement. The other thing we want to mention is that you want to add some other measures to your resume. So numbers always provide a measurable indicator when it comes to performance. So if it's possible and you've been in a field where you've had to use figures, dollars, or percentages, that can add additional credibility to your resume. So if you've ever been in a field of, finance or sales, include some of that information in your resume writings as well. Just as that title states, you don't need to have work experience to have skills. We touched on this a little bit about transferable skills, which are skills you can take from any area of one place of employment and transfer that to any area of work. So these are really important to highlight, especially if you're somebody who has limited experience. So some of the transferable skills you learned from college is able to set goals and achieve them, knowledge of industry computer programs, group and teamwork skills, handle multiple assignments, presentation skills, just to name a few. And I'll do a little exercise with you just on the next screen. So here's another great example when it comes to identifying your transferable skills. So I'll give you an example here. Let's say that you've worked and you've taken orders at a fast food restaurant. How might you write that down as a transferable skill? You could say something like used strong communication skills to accurately pass on important information. Maybe you've worked in a retail store. You could say something like demonstrated excellent customer service skills, providing feedback and proposing solutions to customer inquiries. Maybe you've worked at a daycare looking after children, or you babysat. You could say something like effectively applied critical thinking and logical problem solving to ensure a cooperative work environment. And lastly, maybe you're somebody who's more hands-on. You've built a fence or a deck. You could say worked as part of a team, contributing ideas and providing support to make sure common goals were met. So really pay attention to all those transferable skills that you have and how you can make them into a complete writing skills statement. Your very last section of your resume is called Other Sections. It's considered an optional section for your resume. So your other sections can be things like interests, activities, awards, memberships, even community involvement / volunteering. If you are somebody that's going to want to include another section on your resume, you really need to think about what's required for the position and what the employers would be interested in knowing. Ask yourself, will it add value to an argument that shows that you're a good candidate for this job? If there is one thing employers do like to see, they do like to see volunteering, community involvement. It does make you stand out. It shows that you're multidimensional. It shows that you demonstrate, personality and a potential fit for a company. The only thing we want to advise you on is you don't want to be listing immature interests or activities that the majority of us enjoy doing. You either want to highlight the unique interests that you have that are either directly related to the field you're applying in, or maybe something that's completely different, which demonstrates that you have a different set of skills. Like, for example, maybe you're somebody who enjoys, marathon running. It could show that you're fit and you enjoy challenges. Maybe you're somebody who's into team sports. You're part of the basketball team. It could show that you excel at teamwork and you have leadership skills. So just be mindful and always make sure that it relates back to the job that you're applying for if you are going to be listing some interests or activities. If you're somebody who wants to talk about volunteering and wants to look at some opportunities, you can visit the Fanshawe College Student Union page. At the very top, they have an icon for volunteer. You can look for opportunities available on campus, and you can also look at some opportunities that are available through Pillar Nonprofit, which is also an external company for London and area, to find some volunteer opportunities that way as well. So when we are targeting our resume, we want to talk about a few things. You really want to make sure that you're adapting your resume for each position you're applying for. Yes, it's going to take time and effort, but it's going to help to make it very clear to the hiring manager or whoever else sees your resume that you indeed are a good fit for that position. So customizing your resume allows you to be able to showcase your qualifications, your accomplishments, and any particular aspect of your work history that closely matches the requirements listed on that job description. You also want to be aware that the more and more you tweak and adjust your resume, the higher risk you are of introducing errors and typos. So you always want to proofread your resume very carefully before you're sending that out to any employer. And you also want to make sure that since, making these revisions takes time, you want to be certain that the job is indeed a good match for you and that the company is, likely to be receptive to your application before you're spending all that time personalizing your resume for a particular position. When we talk about visual presentation, so as we said earlier, your cover letter is always one page on its own. Your resume does not exceed more than 2 pages in length. Your contact information that appears on page 1 should also appear on page 2. So your resume does not exceed more than 2 pages and it's never printed back to back, double-sided. It's always 2 sheets of paper. You want to make sure with your resume you're using bullet points. So you want to list everything in bullet points. You don't want to be using paragraphs or sentences, so you're not going to have periods at the end of your statements. You want to make sure that you're being consistent with your format, and that means the size of your format, the font, and the spacing. And again, you always want to triple check for those spelling errors as well. You want to make that best first impression. Talking about personalizing but not plagiarizing, you also want to make sure that when you are doing your resume, you're keeping your resume clean and concise. You want to proofread your resume numerous times. Again, you want to limit your resume to 2 pages at most. You always want to make sure that you tailor that particular resume to the position you're applying for. At the end of the day, you just want to be honest, highlight what you've accomplished, state your achievements. Using the internet is perfectly fine. We use the internet for all of our items. You just don't want to be copying everything word for word. So always make sure that when you are doing your resume, even if you're using resources of online, which we all do, just try and put some of your learning into your own words as well. No resume should be the same. And also don't forget, look up the learning outcomes for your program to identify skill area. They have skill areas that identify upon completing your full-time program. These are the skills that you can take to any workplace. So do make sure that you are proofreading those sections, putting your own, describing everything into your own learning as well. But those are really great things that you can reference as well. If you're somebody watching today's session and you need some additional assistance, you will have access to a career consultant. You can meet your career consultant in person, virtually, by email, over the phone, whatever is the best method for you. So to reach your consultant, you can access this information by going on your FOL account, clicking on co-op resources, co-op career, and CCR. You can find a list of your co-op consultants that way. It's also presented here for you. The names are listed in bold, followed by their email addresses and all the schools that they represent. So for example, if you're somebody in the Lawrence Kinlan School of Business, your contact is Christina Rapson. If you're at London South, it's Christina Lark. So just have a look at your academic program school, and that's how you'll be able to determine how to connect with your consultant, and you can reach them by email to schedule an appointment at any time. I want to thank everyone for watching today's session. I hope you found this helpful. Just remember, Fanshawe, we're here for you. If you do need additional support, please do connect with your career consultant. We'll be happy to help you. Thank you so much. Take care.